You are live.
One of the reasons I was late was I've been on the phone to the head of the MRC. The little logo on the bottom left-hand corner is UK PBC. This was funded by the MRC, national money to make a difference in a disease. And I think she was very interested in what we have done and why it's been successful. And I think this has been a long road, a long path, but I think we have moved the disease on, and I'll explain where we are and why we've done that. So it's been a lot of people and a lot of time, but I think we've made a difference, and I think that's all any of us can ask to do. And I think we've done it by keeping a clear focus on what we're doing and why we're doing it, and most of all on patients, that actually this has to be for a purpose. And I think we, working in universities, you'll often come across people who do research, and they'll say it's for all these good reasons, but actually it's for themselves, it's because that's what they want to do, and actually it's not about the broader good. And what we've done is to try and set out to make a difference. And this is the essence of what we're on about, which is that there are, traditionally, this would be PBC, okay? And these are just some cases. 65-year-old woman, abnormal LFTs at a well woman clinic, mild itch, AMA positive, liver biopsy showed stage 1 PBC, started UDCA, 12 months later, liver function test normal, itch resolved, okay? And that's the perception of PBC. The second case is a 37-year-old woman, profound fatigue, alkaline phosphatase 630, ALT 122, still AMA positive, but this time ANA positive as well, so different antibodies. Liver biopsy still early stage, but marked interface hepatitis and starting to lose her ducts. This is a biopsy that is really sick. Started UDCA, 12 months later, alk phos is still 500, ALT is still 98, bilirubin is 19, and she's still fatigued. We haven't touched her with treatment. Unable to function at the moment and very worried about the future, and she should be. And the reason I show these cases is that if you ask any hepatologist what PBC is, they'd say it's the first case. Okay? But that's the traditional view. Mild disease in elderly women, mild itch is the only symptom, responds well to URSO, low risk, unlikely to die of a disease, will need a transplant. What's the problem? Why are people like you banging on about PBC? What are you trying to solve? And the answer is, in 2017, 2018, it's a different disease. We are seeing increasingly an aggressive disease in young women and men. Fatigue is a prominent or even life-altering feature. It's not just about liver disease and blood tests, it's about life. Minimal response to URSO and no symptom improvement. Complex biology, high risk of need for transplant, and we need to do something about that. And I think one of the things that we do here, which is different, is that we have specialist clinics. And once you have specialist clinics, this becomes very obvious. So anybody who's sat in the clinic, and Jess, who's wave, Jess Layton's doing a master's with us this year and knows the clinic very well. Anybody who sits in the clinic will see this, but if you don't see lots of PBC patients, you don't see this. And that's the essence of it, is that this is a different disease in different people, but when it's a horrible disease, it's a really horrible disease. So what we do is set out to make a difference. And one of those is to reduce the risk to life or need for transplant associated with liver failure, progression of cirrhosis. That's the conventional sort of liver approach. You want to stop people developing bad disease, fibrosis, scarring, cirrhosis. But also there's this nasty process in PBC where you lose your bile duct. So that's a really big issue. So you need to stop the liver disease getting worse, but you also need to improve the quality of life of people and functional status. So quality of life is how you feel, functional status is how you manage to live your life. And those are really important because actually that's what matters to people today and tomorrow and the day after. Abstract concepts of risk are one thing, but this is the day-to-day issue. And people have bad quality of life for several reasons. Now if you get bad cirrhosis, then clearly that can have its impacts. But we have the itch, which is a major issue, and then we also have this issue of fatigue and cognitive impairment. Fatigue and memory problems and concentration problems, brain fog, batteries running down. And as everyone knows, this is something that we've been interested in for a long time. And we have some kind of pretty exciting stuff to say at the end of all of this. Research goal for UK PBC was to understand why URSO didn't work in some people. Does that matter? You know, why does that happen and what does it matter? Because at the moment, everyone thinks we have an effective treatment. We do. It kind of works for most people, but for some people it clearly doesn't. So to try and understand that, to develop approaches to treat people, and then to understand and treat the symptoms of PBC. So to understand why people don't do well, do something about it, and then while we're at it, do something about the symptoms. And I think we've been moderately successful. One of the things that we did was change the name, this was actually came from the original launch meeting for UK PBC, and Tilly was there, and we asked the patients, representatives there, what they wanted us to do in the disease to make a difference, and the answer was three things. One was to get rid of postcode lotteries where different people in different parts of the country get different management, which is unfair. The second was to do something about fatigue. And the third was to do something about the bloody name, because people hated it because of the word cirrhosis. And so, ironically, one of the things that we've done in the last few years is change the name. So it's now primary biliary cholangitis. The abbreviation is the same. But it takes away the word cirrhosis, which is not correct for most people. Most people with PBC don't have cirrhosis. So, but I think this is important for two reasons. One is I think it's a more accurate name, but the other is it's a clear statement that we listen to what matters and do something about it. So it's an interesting exercise to get your name changed. And actually the way you change name in medicine is just say you're going to do it, and then write lots of very learned articles about it, and then just make sure that you always use the new term, and so the name is changed. So the starting point for all of this is a piece of work, and I think one of the things that we did here, which is very, very different, is that when I first did PBC work, you do studies with 20, 30 patients in it. We did the first 1,000-person study. There's a thing called the PBC 40, which a lot of you are familiar with, which is the quality of life symptom of these meetings. For years, people would come along and listen to my bad jokes and the talk, and then in return they had to fill in one of these questionnaires. You remember that very well. All of the process led this to be a normal tool. That led to most of this, and the reason it led to most of this is because we had the tools to be able to do trials in PBC. So don't ever underestimate the power of the process that you need to do. So people remember that. And it's led to all of these studies. But one of the things we looked at was why did people not respond to URSO? So was there a problem here? Was it real or was it apparent? And basically what you've got in blue is the survival from 0% of a population at the bottom to 100% each of the graphs. In blue it's people who respond to URSO, deoxycholic acid, and in red it's people who don't respond. So simple as that. There are responders and there are non-responders. What's the difference in terms of survival? So you can see, look at the top right-hand corner, the blue thing, by 10,000 days, 94% of people are still alive, free of a transplant. Okay, they're responders. And the red, by 10,000 days, it's about 35%. So 65% of people who died or had a transplant. That is real. And this is data for the UK. And I said that the derivation of PBC 40 was the first 1,000-person study in PBC. We did originally 100-person studies. This is work on 3,000 or 4,000 people. These are giant groups of people, and that gives a power to the data. Nobody can argue about that. Now we're about to do our first 10,000-person study in PBC. I will not be around to do a 100,000-person study, so that's it in terms of adding noughts at the end. But if you study 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people, it means that you can't argue with it. So you can't argue with that that's real. That's real. So we need to understand who a non-responder to UDCA is and to do something about it. But whatever the cause is, this is real. This is really bad news. The kind of good news is, if you are an URSO responder, then actually your survival is very good. So we use this in the clinic to really reassure a group of people who are very low risk. So it's really important in clinical practice, but it's a starting point for everything else. Again, we never saw this coming, and I think if you look at what we did that was kind of useful and important, this is one of these things. This is treatment failure, so who are URSO non-responders. And it's interesting, it's age dependent, depends on when you got the PBC. But if you presented with PBC below the age of 50, you had a 50% chance of not responding to URSO. So 50 out of 50 is the message. So 50% of patients presenting at the age of 50 will not respond to treatment. That's where risk is. And if you go down to 20s and 30-year-olds, then it's even higher. And that's why we still transplant people for PBC. It's because it's the young patients who need lots of years out of their liver who have these problems. So this is a young person's problem set. I think that's where my young patient at the beginning is so important. It's different in different age groups. Now, this work was done by Greta Pells, who actually currently is in the army. So she did some work with us, and she's currently in the Special Forces. And she gets to places in the... I get postcards from places in the world where I didn't think the British Army was, but it clearly is. So she has a much more exciting life than me. But the reason I mention that is that she was your predecessor doing an MRes, okay? So this is a very nice journal hepatology paper which is transfull practice, so no pressure, okay? No pressure. We've got another tool that came out from all of this, which is a non-responder and responder. It's a bit blunt, isn't it? So just above or below a line. And actually, what you can do is convert that into a much more sensitive tool. So again, people from the clinic may be familiar with this, is that we now have worked out that a number of different blood tests. So when people often say, why do you do blood tests? What are you actually looking at? What you're looking at is levels, and those levels predict risk. And actually, there are 5 different blood tests that predict your risk after you've been on urso. Alkaline phosphatase, that's your standard liver blood test, is one of them. But bilirubin, which is the jaundice chemical, and other things do it. And this isn't very useful, but what you can do is convert it into kind of risk lines. And what this shows is that if you look up in the sort of top left up here, these are survival curves. Plenty of people do very well with PBC. It's very important to remember that. But there is actually just a small group of people, about 25% of people, 10% of people. This is 25%. This is the worst 10%. So that's where the risk is. So you can use a score from this to be able to calculate risk. And that's, again, not much use, but this is available on the Apple iTunes iStore. You can show my familiarity with Apple products by what I just said. Sadly, it's not on Google, not on Android. It's very difficult to do Android apps, but this is an Apple app. And you can actually calculate your own risk with PBC based on the lab tests you use. And we use this in the clinic to reassure people, so very low risk people. If you've got low risk people, it really is very low, the sort of blue line. So this is a tool that is available, and it's the sort of thing that we've done that is useful in clinical practice. This is probably going to be even more useful, and again, it's another 3,000 patients, big numbers. The first model was to predict what happens to you after you've been on urso for a year. And I said to you, the problem here is when you don't respond to urso. But actually, if you've got to wait a year to find that out before you treat somebody differently, then it's a wasted year. This is a new model, which is not in progress, it's about to come out. This allows us to predict what's going to happen to you on day 1 when you walk into the clinic. So this is a bit of the holy grail in PBC, which is that we will be able to predict with real accuracy what's likely to happen to you from day 1. And that will allow us to use better treatment early on. So the change, there's going to be quite a profound change coming, which isn't waiting to fail with treatment, it's to use better treatment from the very beginning. None of this is rocket science. None of this involves anything other than the standard blood tests that you get done in a clinic. But this allows us to really predict what's going to happen and change what we do. And the point I said about focusing on patients, this is what I mean by it. Rather than writing erudite papers on genes and molecules, it's tools that are really useful in the clinic. So what this tells us is that urso non-response is biological. It also tells us that this issue of bile duct injury is the heart of it. And what this study also showed us, which is important, is that delaying treatment changes the outcome. So one of the questions has always been, what should you do about urso? Sometimes it doesn't work, should I not use it? What we know is that actually responding to urso is good, and you are less likely to respond to urso the longer you leave it. So there's a really simple message here. Everybody should get treated with urso PBC immediately when they have the diagnosis, and they should continue forever. Clearly, if you find high-risk people, that's no good unless you do something about it. This is probably the landmark, which is the paper about obeticholic acid, Ocaliva, which is now available on the NHS in the UK as a result of all of this work. And this is in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the world's leading medical journal. And this paper, so this is kind of the most important paper I've been involved with. And it's important for all manner of reasons, one of which is its new treatment for PBC, which is available in the clinic. But actually, the main benefit of this is that it allows me to address a problem, which is that my wife had a New England Journal of Medicine paper before me, and she never shut up about it. So she's an anaesthetist in Gateshead, and she had a New England Journal of Medicine paper, and she never shut up about it. Have you had a New England Journal of Medicine paper? I have. And so finally I got a New England Journal of Medicine, so I can answer that. Now, I do appreciate that's a minority thing, but it's important to me. What this shows is that if you take people who haven't responded to URSO, half of those will respond to Ocaliva, which is the new treatment. Okay, really effective, and we now prescribe this. So Jess will testify. We now have a system to prescribe this on the NHS in the UK. And the day I wrote my first NHS prescription, you've heard me talk about failures of treatment for years. The moment you not only have done all this work to have a new treatment, but got it in trials and approved by the FDA in America and the EMA, and then got it through NICE, and you can write an NHS prescription. Actually, that was quite an emotional moment, because this has been a really long journey, but actually it's one that has achieved it. So this is real, it's in practice. The other thing about obeticholic acid is that we did a lot of the R&D about it, and it's made by a company called Intercept in America, based in San Diego, a small company. They're very proactive, they work in PBC, they've been transformative. Having somebody interested in PBC makes an enormous difference. Drug companies get a hard time, but drug companies make drugs, okay? And if we don't have drug companies, we don't have drugs. So constructive working with industry is essential. They are based in San Diego, they have a head office in New York, but all their manufacturing is done in Morpeth at the Pyramid plant outside Morpeth, okay? And that's because of the relationship with the UK. So not only does all of this work generate new treatments that we then get into practice, actually there are manufacturing jobs in the UK. I think actually that's really important. Actually, that's really important. So they could have done it anywhere, but they work in the UK. So that's a really good story. And this is routine and out there in clinical practice. This is a horrible slide. I won't do a test on it at the end. What this tells us, though, is that actually the thing to look at is this line here. These are people whose blood tests don't improve at all with a treatment. So this is placebo, dummy tablets, and there are as many people above the line getting worse as there are below the line getting better. But if you look at 10 milligrams of OCA, which is the treatment, everybody is below that line. But only some of them are blue who meet the endpoint of the trial, some of them are still dots who didn't quite make it. The bottom line is don't take that 50% to heart. Everybody on this drug improves. It's just the level to which you do it. So this actually is a really good treatment. But, there's an important but, it can make itch worse in people who've got itch. That is its flaw, and that's its limitation. So progress moves on in order to be able to address this. Okay? This is the itch data. So it is an issue. We manage it pretty effectively in the clinic, but it's the Achilles heel. If ursodeoxycholic acid was the first generation treatment in PBC, and obeticholic acid or Ocaliva is the second generation, this is a drug called MBX-8225 or Delbar, and this is the next one that's coming along. And if you look at the green lines here, these are people on the drug whose blood tests return to normal. So this doesn't improve blood tests, it normalises blood tests. Okay? So this seems to be a step up further from Ocaliva and has real potential. So this is about to come into a phase 3 trial. We led all of this stuff. Again, it's one of the things that we've done most of the work on. But this appears to be an order of magnitude better even than Ocaliva. It does not cause itch, okay, which is very important. And I have seen the fatigue data, and this drug improves fatigue. So this has real potential, okay? So it moves on, and I think we've now got third and even fourth generation drugs coming. What we've done, however, is to understand what on earth's going on. And this is the really key bit, which is that actually, we always thought that this was the immune response. You've heard me bore people's tears about the immune response, and we're not going to talk about it at all today, because it's no benefit for treatment. Immune injury damages your bile duct. But what we've also learned is that your bile duct tries to cope with injury. So it tries to recover. It's stunned and it tries to recover, and it proliferates. So the bile duct cells regrow to try and cope with the injury. But eventually it runs out of ability to do that. Basically the cells become old, can't divide anymore, and they give in. and that's when you lose the bile ducts and get the disease. So it isn't this that's the problem, it's this failing. And the other thing that's really important is that when that happens, it promotes inflammation, so it makes it all worse. We've christened this as screaming epithelium. Okay? When you get to as I've said to various people, I'm at a strange point in my career in between having anything useful to say and getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. So I go around being philosophical and making up fancy names for things. So all of this is somebody else's science, but I came up with screaming epithelium. Okay? There was actually a project about using technology to monitor people in the community, with liver failure, and my only contribution to it, it's a big EU project, my only contribution to it was the title, which was de-liver, you see, because we were going to deliver something in people who had been delivered by, anyway, so but that was my only contribution, so I'm in the philosophical stage. So this is at the heart of it. If you cope with this okay, you're fine with the disease, but if this all goes wrong, that's where you get the disease. And we have put this idea forward a decade ago, so this has been proved to be right. Completely right. So we were kind of onto this, and this was the beginning of all of this. So why does all this matter? What we're doing with the new treatments, Ursa a little bit, Ocaliva a little bit, Delbar is breaking this cycle to stop this happening. But we go back up there. So what's fourth generation treatment look like? And this is where we get into something that I've tentatively talked about in these meetings, which is cure. So this just shows that if you look at liver biopsies in people, this is normal liver, and this is whether or not you get these aged, dying cells. This is early liver, this is normal. This is low-risk PBC. Low-risk PBC patients with normal biochemistry have none of this. And actually, high-risk people start to get this in essence. If you look at people who've then had a liver transplant, if you look at the liver that's come out, they've got this. So this death through old age of the bile duct cells is exactly what's happening in the disease. And this is there from the very beginning of the disease. So this is some very complex molecular biology. This is looking at genes expressed in liver tissue. And this is to look at the liver biopsies of people on day one, when they presented years and years ago, and to look at whether the genes are expressed are the same. And it doesn't really matter how you present it, but this is just groups of disease. This is normal liver, way over here, and this is PBC, so clearly normal liver and PBC are very different. But the red ones are patients who are high risk, and the green ones are patients who are low risk. So there is a very different disease process from day one in PBC patients who are high risk. So it isn't just that it's over the years the disease becomes different, it always was different. This is why the 37-year-old is different. We have to understand what's happening in them and treat that much more effectively. Okay? Now this work was done by Claire Hardy. Jess, do you know what Claire Hardy was when she did this work? MRes student? She was an MRes student, so no pressure. Why does all that matter? The answer is that's the route to cure. Okay? That's the route to cure, because if we can understand that process and target it, and that's the next generation of treatment. So we aren't finished yet. Now this is really important. This is about quality of life, and I think this is something that we've really focused on, because we can make your biochemistry better, but if it doesn't make you any better, it doesn't add anything. And this again is some quite worrying data. This is, if you ask people about their quality of life and the extent to which it's affected by PBC, if you look at older people, there is some quality of life impairment, but it's not huge. So people, maybe it's expectations, maybe it's what they want, maybe it's the disease is different. But you look at young people, it's astronomical. Over half of people would say their quality of life is badly affected by PBC. And this is, I think, partly because expectations that if you can't go out or work or something and you're 30, that is going to weigh very heavily on you. So this is a real burden. Again, it's much more of a problem in younger patients. This is a vicious disease in younger patients. Now, you're probably thinking, he said nice were really helpful, okay? Now the meme out there, the sort of viewpoint is that nice and nasty and evil and stop drugs being made available. And this drug got approved in half a day, okay? And one of the things that I said at the beginning with the UK PBC is that if we ended up outside NICE holding placards with patient groups protesting about drug not being approved, we have failed, because we have not made a good enough case. And we wanted to be in there making the case, because if you come up with new drugs and you can't then use them in the NHS, you've failed just as much if you didn't find the drug. In fact, more so, because you've you've got opportunity and can't take it. So one of the things that we did right from the beginning of UK PBC was to work on all of the things to get the drug approved. And this is the data that helped us get the drug approved. So we were in the room making the case. Why? Because we want to have the drug available. And what this tells us, so these are health utilities, which you won't know too much about, but essentially we can grade people's health on the basis of a score from 0 to 1. So 1 is perfect health, which is unattainable, and then 0 is equivalent to death. So and most people without illness would be in the 0.95 range, so nobody has perfect health. Okay? And then there are various different situations which can drop that. So what we've done again is thousands of people is to understand what makes PBC worse, what are the kind of drivers in all of this. And what you can find, very interestingly, there is a large group of PBC patients out there who have normal health utility, 0.95. So you can have a completely normal life with PBC. And that's really important. A lot of people say Crohn's disease, everyone with Crohn's disease has a bad time with it, nobody's normal. Yes, there are. There are plenty of normal people. Okay? So that's an achievable goal. However, if you've got symptoms, you drop right down here. And if you've got symptoms and complications of cirrhosis, you're right down here. These are big drops. So symptoms make you much worse, complications make you worse still. Okay? The money is about what the cost of managing PBC is, and this reflects the treatments that are available. So £2,000 a year is the sort of cost for most people. That's your hospital visits, GP visits, and the cost of Urso. Okay? So you can start to understand, this is the data that tells you what the problem is, and so therefore you start to solve it, then you can justify it. Why does this matter? 1 year at a health utility of 1 is 1 quality adjusted life year, and NICE will pay £30,000 for it. It's as simple as that. So we show this disease causes really important abnormalities in people's health utility, therefore a costly drug is justified, and therefore we got it approved. So you think, why is he prattling on about health economics? And the answer is, if you want to get a drug approved by NICE, don't stand outside of the placard, hit them with the data, and then they're perfectly reasonable. What makes you worse with PBC is a kind of way of restating it. Having had a liver transplant is associated with poor utility. People after a liver transplant do not return to normal. It's really important. Ascites is bad for you, fatigue is bad for you. So there's some predictable things. One of the very interesting things is Urso makes you better. So the only thing that actually makes people better in terms of their function with PBC is Urso. This predates OCA, so this is real life data. And actually that's the other bit to the debate, should you use Urso, should you not use Urso? I said before, the longer you wait, the worse it is in terms of benefits, so you should start at the beginning. And this tells you you should use it in everybody, because everybody gets a benefit. So that's why everybody with PBC should be on Urso, if they can tolerate it. And the message that we use is you should be using all the dose in all the patients for all the time. And that's a really, really simple message. Okay? So what about symptoms? What can we do to make it better? Well, this is, again, some work that we've been doing on new drugs. And again, many people have taken part in these trials. This is with the GSK 2330672. They always have snappy names in early drug development, so I do apologise. And this is the first new generation itch treatment. And this is really exciting. So itch is manageable in most people, but in some people it's a really severe thing. And this is a trial of a new agent that is really quite dramatically effective for itch. So that's ongoing in a much bigger trial. And I think something potentially in this area is very important. So we are making real progress with symptoms. But, and it is a but and a depressing but, we're not making progress in fatigue. And this is the data from the rituximab trial that many people in Newcastle took part in, looking at the drug rituximab's ability to improve fatigue. And what we found is that there is absolutely an improvement in fatigue scores in people with rituximab, but in the trial you also see a benefit in people on placebo, so dummy drug is associated with, and that's the placebo effect to be aware of. Wears off much more quickly, there is a difference, but not enough to suggest that rituximab is useful, and that's a real shame, because we put a lot of effort into this, we felt this may be useful in fatigue, and deep down we think that's the area you need most progress. So unfortunately, of all the trials that we've done, this is the only negative one, and it's probably the one that was most important, so slightly negative. However, even from a negative, there are some interesting positives. If you look at what rituximab does, it drops your AMA, which is the antibody people with PBC have. But look over here, This is the number of people who had normal liver blood tests. Normal, not improved, normal. Post-rituximab, 98%. Okay? So rituximab didn't treat fatigue, but it made people's livers return to normal. And this is the cure argument, that actually what rituximab does is work in a completely different way in combination with urso, and it seems to return people to normal. So this isn't a treatment in PBC, and rituximab is not something we're going to use, but it tells us we can return people to normal. And remember, the health utility says that when you return to normal, you can have a normal life. This disease is curable, and that's the next challenge. But urso on its own doesn't particularly do that, and so we need to work more on it. Now, John will remember, and Joan, many, many years ago, probably the first thing they ever did with LIVErNORTH was the trip to London. Remember the trip to London? Okay, the trip to London. And this is, we took a group of people down to London to have some advanced brain imaging, okay? And this was the very first study that we did to look at people's fatigue because of the problem with it, okay? And we took a group of people who had bad fatigue scores and good fatigue scores. So this was a whole strand of work done by Jenny Goldblatt, who was a real pioneer in this area, who really defined fatigue as a problem in PBC. Now, Jess, did you know what Jenny was doing when she did all of that work that transformed the landscape? I was. She was, so no pressure. So this was about really, and until that people kind of noticed it but done nothing about it. And so we wanted to look to essentially some brain imaging, what was going on in people's brains. And we took a group of people down, this is long before this type of scanning was available in Newcastle, it's a really long time ago, this is a follow-on study. And we took a bus of people from the back of the Freeman, and we all had to walk out from the door that people came in to get the bus. And nobody knew why they'd been invited. They'd just been invited to take part in the study of brain function in PBC, but I knew that some were fatigued, some weren't. By the time we got to the bus, the groups were separated completely into the fatigued and non-fatigued. And that was the point at which I really knew this was real. This was real. And we took them down, did some work, and showed that actually there's some real significant brain changes in people with fatigue. Okay? And that has had a direct line to another strand of work that we're now working on. So that was the beginnings of something very exciting. And this is some more work we've done with Sam Taylor Robinson. And this is brain scans, those same brain scans we did back in the day there. But in those this time we looked at people with really early PBC, within the first 6 months of the disease. And it doesn't matter what the measure is, but these are normal individuals and these are PBC patients, and you can see they're different. So the brains of PBC patients in terms of function are different from the very beginning of the disease. This is why people get brain fog. There is a brain process going on, okay? And this is potentially, and doesn't look it, but is potentially the most exciting thing that I'll show today. So this is, we do very little mouse work, but sometimes you have no choice because you need to push forward with things. And if you make mice cholestatic, if you damage their bile ducts, then they develop behaviour patterns like patients with PBC. Short-term memory problems, lack of energy, lack of engagement, okay? But it allows you to look at therapies, all right? And what we found is that you can measure, and the way you measure it doesn't really matter, but you're looking for the extent to which animals will behave normally. And so if you make animals cholestatic, then this is a behaviour test, and actually what you're looking for is anything above 0.7 on this scale to be normal. You take animals and make them cholestatic, they behave very abnormally. But if you give them a beta-cholic acid or Ocaliva, after they've developed it, they return to normal. So you can cure mice with cholestasis of their fatigue if you do that early in the disease. So Ocaliva doesn't treat fatigue as we use it, but we currently use it in people who failed treatment. Okay? If you use differently, if you go after the disease at the very beginning, if humans behave like the mice in this regard, there's no reason why they shouldn't, then they normalise very effectively. So this potentially is the revolution. Okay? And the fatigue improvement with Delbar is probably a more effective drug, and we're starting to see a signal. People may have heard on the Today programme, I drive my boys into school every morning. We have a sweepstake as to say what's first on the Today programme. Is it Brexit? Is it Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn or Donald Trump? And it's usually Brexit, but Trump's usually up there. But when they're not annoying me with things like that, what they do is have people presenting their science. And you may well have heard lots of talk about blood-brain barriers and depression. So the blood-brain barrier becomes permeable and allows toxins into the brain. It's a really trendy theory about depression. Why do animals of cholestasis develop abnormalities in their thinking? It's because their blood-brain barrier becomes permeabilised. What does Ocaliva do? It normalises that. So it is the only therapy that will normalise the blood-brain barrier, that keeps the brain isolated from toxins. If you keep mice for 15 months, once they get to 15 months, they slow down, their thinking slows down, they are unable to process information. If you give those animals Ocaliva from 12 months onwards, you stop that happening. This is a general effect associated with diseases where inflammation causes your brain to leak, poisons get in, and you get fatigue. So there is something about Ocaliva and what it does. It appears to be part of the control of a normal blood-brain barrier. So not only is this a very interesting treatment for PBC, this is potentially a revolutionary treatment for a number of diseases with fatigue. So this is potentially very important. It comes from left field. Okay? And just to show this is the brains of animals. We can show gadolinium is a contrast for it. You can measure how much is there. And if you look in the brain, if you take animals, they have very little contrast getting in. If you then make them ill, you get contrast going into the brain, and you give them Ocaliva, then that contrast normalises. So you can reverse that effect. That's the future. Okay? Cure, fatigue, sorted. Okay? I can retire. In the meantime, there is a big issue about, and we're very live to this. Remember what the patient said? 3 things. Change the bloody name, get equity of treatment, and sort out fatigue. So we're making some progress. We did the name, we're sorting fatigue out, but equity of treatment is really important. We're also very aware that we are getting better at treating the disease, but we are making it more complicated. So the danger is that we end up with a greater spread between a specialist clinic like ours and a DGH, an ordinary hospital, where they don't know all this stuff. So it's great here, but we're making it more and more difficult for people. And so this is another part of what I do. I'm a busy guy. And this is a European reference network. This is a Europe-wide approach to getting perfect treatment out to everybody with rare liver diseases, of which PBC is one of them. And so this is really important, slightly complicated by current relationships with Europe, but this is a really good initiative around how we get best practice to everybody. So it's about standards of care going out into practice. Again, it's not rocket science, it's not genes and clever things, it's about getting the basics of treatment out to everybody. So we're working very hard on that. It's not an issue around here because the care is very good, but it is an issue in Truro. I always offend people. I always say, we call this the Truro question. How do you get the best possible care for PBC in Truro? And it's only because it's as far away from here as you can get in England. It's not meant to be rude about Truro, but I did upset somebody who came from Truro who got very offended by that. So it's not anything to do with Truro, it's about distance. Okay? So we're working on this, and it's about getting simple messages. And 50 at 50, okay? That sense that 50% of people don't respond to treatment, that's one of these messages. All the patients, all the dose, all the time is another of those messages. Really simple messages that go out there. And some of the work that Jess has been doing has been around how good we are at actually treating patients. And we're not as good as we think we are, and there is a simple issue about it. I think one of the routes to this is the person who should own knowledge about disease state and then how we manage it better are patients, okay? And I think we need an era where people challenge their doctors and ask them what they're doing and why they're doing it, okay? In America, they do that all the time. I had a lady, I got a phone call once, and this woman came on the phone and she said, "Is that Dr. Jones?" Now, all British people, when they speak to Americans, turn into Hugh Grant. So I turned into Hugh Grant. And so he said, "Oh, yes, yes, it's Dr. Jones." She said, "Oh, can I ask you a question?" So I said, "Oh, yes, fire away." And she said, "I've got bad itch, and I'm not happy with my doctor. What do you suggest?" And I said, "Oh, you're not from round here, are you?" And she said, "No, I'm from Brooklyn. Can't you tell?" And I said, "Well, it's just a hint." And in fact, she wasn't happy with her itch management, so she'd gone on the internet, found out somebody who knew something about it, and she phoned them up. That's what the Americans do. And I actually referred her to somebody else in New York who managed her itch, and she was very nice about it. The first person I ever treated with Ocaliva flew in from California to see us and could get it in America. So we need to get a little bit like the Americans and get a little bit angry about the care and be a little bit more customary about it, if you like. This is the new clinical guideline. This is some work that we all did around European treatment guidelines. And it's really important because there are some real differences. For the first time, symptoms are part of the normal management of PBC. For the first time, measuring the response to ursodeoxycholic acid after you've started it is part of normal management. Adding a second-line treatment if you don't respond to urso is normal management. This is all new. This all comes out of UK PBC and the work we've done. This isn't research, this is normal practice. So we have, I would like to think, kind of moved the goalposts a little bit. At the moment, we still do a lot of work around supporting people for fatigue, helping them to live their lives, and this is part of what we do in the clinics. This is very much a training tool, helping people to understand the disease. So there is a real need for progress in this space. And what about the future? So the future is firstly to roll out OCA in practice. It's licensed, it's there, use is patchy, it's high around here, not so much in other places. And we have to absolutely address the postcode lottery. And I don't want to scare people, but I got a referral in the clinic of a lady, and it was from not a local clinician, but not far away. And it was from a clinician who wrote a letter saying, I've been managing this lady, she's 55 now, and she's not as well as she was, and I think maybe now's the time for you experts to see her. And she didn't turn up for the clinic because she died that day. And I think we all would understand that was probably a bit late to refer us. That's awful. And the family contacted me to talk about PBC, and they said, you know, we really, in retrospect, we weren't happy. But we wish we'd said to the doctor, I think she's quite sick, can't we do more? We must stop being polite to people. We must stop being polite. And get angry and, you know, ask for a second opinion. And I think one of the things that we're working on, this is what Jess is doing, is around feeling able to speak to your clinician about what's going on. Own your problem, own the disease, own the numbers, own the questions. Why are you not referring me for second-line therapy? If clinicians get uncomfortable with that, then they're not very good, okay? So I think we need to have a little bit of revolution with clinicians. The next question is, why mess around? Why not just give better treatment? You know, why mess around seeing whether you respond to treatment or not? Well, it can't be with Ocaliva for two reasons. One is the cost, and the other is the itch. So we'll actually make more people worse than we will benefit them. So we need to be very careful with that. But there is an alternative called fibrates, which we've used quite a lot of. Fenofibrate and bezafibrate. So you may know people who take those. Those are lower benefit drugs, but they are useful at the beginning of the disease. And I think the direction of the future is a combination therapy when people first present. Stop this from getting worse in the first place. So I think we've kind of added layers, but we've sort of lost sight of the purpose. Better therapy at the beginning. Better treatment early for very high-risk disease. Curative disease, understand risk, understand what's going on, reverse that process, cure people. And then finally novel treatments in fatigue. And I think there will be a clinical trial specifically at fatigue in young patients within a year, looking at the brain effect. So this is all going to happen very quickly. It's a slow process. The paperwork, as we all know, can be onerous with it, but we are chipping away at all of this. So I think we are on the way to addressing the three questions. We've kind of done one and a half. So we've done the disease name, we're kind of on the way with fatigue, and we're kind of not doing too badly about the postcode lottery, but there are still issues. So it's been a revolution, and I think it's still going pretty well. So there's a lot of new stuff here. I haven't talked about pretty much any of this at these meetings, so it's been a very exciting time. And as always, thank you to everybody for the support for it, the support of the funding to get these things started. Starting projects is very difficult because they're wacky ideas. And the brain stuff started through LIVErNORTH. I mean, it started with LIVErNORTH, as simple as that. Never happened otherwise. But also people's participation. So we now got people on their third or fourth trials. That's a revolution in PBC. And I think But what I would say to people, sometimes I say when research is all about you, I'm a guinea pig for things. People who started it at the beginning of this, they can watch that treatment in the NHS. This does go somewhere. It's not just paper clip collecting. So this is a thank you to everybody who's helped us with it. So I'll probably shut up at that point.
So any questions for Professor Jones?
I've lost my voice. Distresses me immensely when we do that.
I'll put this up.